Hey, we back. We're here on lobot, and we're doing an interesting video today. Maybe not, probably not. But I've had it requested a couple of times to go through different team types, and I feel like this is a reasonably good idea because a lot of people don't understand how different team types work. To be fair, I am not the expert on this, so if you are the expert on this, feel free to have a complete rant at me in the comments. I expect it to happen with this one. But for those that don't really know much about OO teams, you may be making your first team at the moment, you're asking a lot of people for some tips. I'm going to go through just generally what teams exist, what you can pick, because contrary to popular belief, there really is no best team. There are certainly teams that do better than others, but it's like a big, complicated rock, paper, scissors, with some teams beating others and so on and so forth. So I'm going to just go over a few of the main types of teams, give you some things to think about when you make your team, what kind of thing do you want to go for, what you should be looking at when you're making your team, e.g. mostly stats. Now, the first disclaimer is level is important. As much as level is not the only thing that's important, it is important. It doesn't matter how good your team is, if you are level 10, you will not beat the level 50 team. The level 50 team is going to win. They probably don't even need weapons. That's just how it works. Level up your team. If you want to do well, you want a high level team. If you want to get on the streak leaderboards, you're going to want to go straight for like level 70 or something. And yes, it's a lot of grinding. It takes a long time. That's why I am not there yet, because it takes a lot of grinding. But putting that aside, there are obviously a lot of things you can do to help yourselves out. Now, we're going to start with the most well-used meta, which is going to be the AoE team. This is looking for something like Energy Staff or Vampire Staff, and these are going to be used with your stereotypical magic attackers. Now, we do have Sword as well. That's an AoE, and that's a physical attacker, but we'll get to Sword in a little bit. I'll be talking about that with the difference between physical and magic attackers, but yes, it does also exist. So magic attackers, you're looking at Fish. Fish has a lot of magic attack, not very much health. He's not that great, but very good for magic attack. Maybe better for blitz. Again, we'll get to that later. Then you also have things like, I don't know, quite a few of the special pets. If you've got some of them, I believe one of these Valentine's ones is pretty good with it. I can't remember which, but one of them is all right. You also have the hidden pets. Monkey, not a great example, but if you've got something like snake or lizard, they're good. In terms of maybe some earlier pets, you're probably looking at deer. Deer's not bad. So yeah, there you go. Magic attackers. They are going to have a high magic attack stat. So as an example, let's have a look at deer. If it feels like working, there we go. Magic attack of 11. Reasonable stat. You're going to want a little bit of health, a little bit of mana. Deer, pretty good. And then you give it at low level, you want Energy Staff. High level, you want Vampire Staff. That's for your AoE damage. Vampire Staff gives you a bit of healing as well, a bit less damage. Energy Staff just on the damage front. Then with this team, you're going to want to put Spirit Staff. That's your stereotypical support. Again, put stereotypical support with that. Frog, squid, again, maybe some of the specials, whatever. If you want more details or which animals work with which roles, I have other videos on teams. This is just about which teams exist. So I won't go over that too much. But yeah, and then you're also going to want a tank. So, you know, snail, boar, owl, I guess, technically. Again, some of the specials, like skull or whatever. And that's your team, right? You want them in the same order that I have this. Obviously, this is not a magic attacker, but you put your magic attacker at the top, then your spirit staff, then your tank. That is your big old meta AoE team. Again, low level you want Energy Staff, high level Vampire Staff. High level is probably like 40 and above, maybe 50 or above, something like that. Once you start getting into the 40s and 50s, you probably want to use Vampire Staff. And that team is very good for streaks. If you want to know how to get a quick like 50,000 streak, you want to go for high levels and pick a team like that. It's gonna do well. At the highest level, you're probably looking for like hidden squid and sloth as your tank, something like that, because they are generally the best with that kind of thing. But yeah, Good team. A very similar team to this is the other big meta, which is the same team but with Dagger instead of V-Staff. Again, this works better at higher levels, but Dagger, great weapon. Do I have an example of a dagger to use? That would be cool. Here we go. Here's a dagger. So what is a little confusing about Dagger is that it has a strength stat and a magic stat. Obviously, you can't have high on both of them. Monkey is your best bet for that, but don't want high on both of them anyway. What you want is the poison, because poison lasts for 3 turns, and so this does 60% of your magic as true damage for 3 turns, which overall is 180% of your magic. The also important thing about this is it's true damage, so it ignores things like defense and special effects and things like that. So that's really good. Whereas the strength, it's only 92%. It's not true damage. It only happens once. Not so good. So you want to have this with a magic attacker, the same as the AoE ones that we just discussed about. So that one's also good. These are the most meta teams, the easiest way to get the high streak, and this is why, in my other videos, they are the teams that I've talked about. If you are just starting out and you just want a quick and easy team, pick something like that, because it is quick and it is easy. Finding a team that fits is not too difficult. You go for something like snail, squid, and I don't know, like unicorn or something if you have to. Maybe deer if you can, and like, it's just easy. You've got a good team, you get hundreds, maybe thousands a streak with that. You're set. As for passives, you want mana tap on the attacking, you want energize on the spirit staff, and either energize and regen on the shield. We'll get into the debate of Energize or Regen in a little bit. There's a lot of things we're getting to. This video might be long. Bear with me. Anyway, the next type of team is the same thing but with single target. I won't go over this too much because it's basically the same concept, but single target ones, things like bow, axe or scythe if you want to go in blitz, but we'll get to that later. Flame staff is pretty good. It does well against tanks. So what's the difference between the single target and the AoE? So the single target is good because it does more damage. So for example, if we have a look at, do I have a bow here maybe? I'm going to have to check the second page of my weapons now. I'm sure I have a bow. Here we go, here's my bow. So you can see the bow here is dealing 160% per turn. That is considerably more than the other weapons. Also, because it's dealing it to a single target, it's going to kill that one single target much quicker, and so then the enemy team is worse off. So in theory, single target is the way to go. However, there's a big downside, which is tanks. Tanks, of course, have your shield, e.g. this one, which applies taunt, taunts the enemy and forces all opponents to attack this animal. Also reduces incoming damage. Most teams are gonna have a tank with a shield, and this means that single target is just hammering into that shield and actually not doing much damage. This is why AoE is better in a lot of cases, because AoE can ignore the shield, attack what's behind it, e.g. like if they've got a fish, for example, with barely any health doing big damage, AoE is going to kill that fish very quickly. And that means that the entire tank's purpose is a bit pointless. And then, of course, if you're not taking damage from the fish, you win, or at least draw, the battle. So, generally, AoE is better than single target. However, single target, like bow, is probably going to do better against things like blitz, because they can kill off that one animal quickly that doesn't have a shield, unless of course it's shield blitz, in which case ignore what I just said. The whole thing depends on many aspects, as you can tell. But yeah, single target versus AoE, that exists. Single target is fun. Shield, as I mentioned, affects the difference between these two teams greatly. You are probably going to want to have a shield in most teams so that you do not get instantly killed by single targets, but because AoE is generally considered better, going up against a single target team is rarer. So then you think, oh, well, maybe I don't need a shield as often. This is where we get into the interplay of if something is really good, people play it more, and then you want something to counter it. Yes, complicated. Blitz also exists, as always. You can have Spirit Staff Blitz, and bow is really good against that. Anyway, Next, I said we would talk about the difference between Energize and Regen. So, Energize and Regen, what have we got? I believe I have a shield with both. Is that? No, it's inactive. Okay. So, we have an Energized shield, and oh dear. And I have a Regen shield. Cooldown on commands, eh? Right, so Regen heals percentage of max HP every turn. This is obviously good for a tank. Tank's going to have a lot of HP. You want it to stay alive as long as possible. That helps. Energize replenishes mana every turn. Shields cost quite a lot of mana. You are going to be struggling to keep a shield running for the entire battle unless you pick an animal with a lot of mana anyway. So Energize is pretty good. Neither of these passives is exclusively better than the other one. Depends on the animal you're using. So for example, if I go for a boar, you can see that it's 4 mana, which is not very much. And it's going to want a shield with Energize to make sure that it can continue using the shield every turn until the end of the battle. Battle ends after 20 turns, by the way. The advantage of boar, despite the fact that it doesn't have much health and it doesn't have much mana either, it does have that 5 attack, so we can actually do some attacks in between turns. The taunt buff lasts on the shield for 2 turns, so then every other turn your tank is doing a bit of damage. This makes it pretty good in teams where you want that extra bit of damage. For example, I use my boar in my single target team with my eagle bow, and I get a bit of extra damage to take out my enemy tank, which I have to attack, earlier. This works nicely. But yeah, you're going to want to use Energize on something like a boar. Whereas with something like a sloth, which is generally considered the best tank, you can see he has a lot more health and a lot more mana. No extra attack, so it's not doing the extra damage. But with this, you're going to want to use the Regen, because it's getting more percentage Regen from the more health. And this 8 mana is easily enough to last for the entire battle anyways. You don't need the extra Energize. Now, the exact position where you switch over from using Energize to Regen, I'm not 100% sure. It's about 5 or 6, I think. But in general, if you're using something with a lot of mana, you want Regen. Using something with low mana, you want Energize. That does not mean necessarily that Sloth is better than Boar, although it is. But that's not the only reason. There's other reasons for that. I mean, for instance, Boar wasting an attack there on magic, that's not helping it. So yeah, there you go. That's that one. What's next? What are we doing next? Let's do physical versus magic attackers. I mentioned those earlier. So we have things like bow and shield for physical attackers, as opposed to energy staff or vampire staff for magic attackers. Which one's better? Now, in general, magic attackers is better. For this, we are taking ourselves over to the official server, where I am checking the pins and finding our little chart. Here we go, the little chart. So let's compare, for example, sword to energy staff, because they're basically the same weapon. You can see that energy staff does 35 to 65% damage to all enemies. Sword does 35 to 55. So sword literally does less damage. Weapon cost 150 to 250, energy staff 100 to 200. So not only does energy staff do more damage, but it also costs less mana. You can see why energy staff is better than sword. However, there is an advantage to using sword. I mentioned that your attack stat is going to be done with basic attacks, for example the boar. This is also true for sword. If you're using, for example, a spider with a sword, has a really high attack stat, it's probably going to run out of mana because of the high cost of using the sword. But after it's run out of mana, it can then continue doing basic attacks, and because it has a lot of attack stat, its basic attacks are pretty good. Whereas if you go for something that's using the energy staff, its basic attacks are going to be pointless. It's not going to have any attack stat. So you really want to make sure that if it's using energy staff, it has enough mana for it. This is why mana tap is so important on something like the energy staff, because as soon, or in fact any magic attack, as soon as it runs out of mana, it's useless. Whereas on something like a sword, what you can instead do is use strength, which increases the damage, and then it doesn't matter so much if it runs out of mana, because you can just carry on doing basic attacks and it's going to be a lot of damage. This is why you see a lot of the time swords with strength, but you're never going to see an energy staff with magic, because this doesn't help so much when it runs out of mana and then you have to do useless basic attacks. Of course, using sword with mana tap is still very good if you want to keep it running for the whole time, but you know, I would say the whole point of using something like sword is that it runs out of mana eventually and you do basic attacks, which is why it's often used with strength. So there is advantages to using physical attackers over magic attackers. Depends on the team you want to make, especially if you're going for a double AoE blitz team. Again, we'll get to blitz later, but then you can't have multiple animals of the same animal. So what you could do is have, for example, fish and spider. Spider running sword with strength, fish running energy staff with mana tap, and you're going to be doing a lot of damage very quickly. Of course, your team is also going to get like one shot basically, so this is not necessarily a great team, but it does quite well. This is why it's called Blitz. Anyway, that's that. The next team we're going to talk about, still not talking about Blitz, that'll come later. We're going to go for Stall next. Now, I mentioned that the turn limit is 20. Can't go over 20 on turns. So a stall team is one that aims to, well, stall until turn 20. And this does not necessarily mean that it's going to last until turn 20 every time. That wouldn't help. You wouldn't get any streak. The point of the stall team is to have a pretty high level. If you've got a low level, you can't really do stall. But if you've got a high level, then you'll find that you beat really under-leveled teams easily, just because they're under-leveled. And then when you get a team that is high level to go up against, you tie and you don't lose your streak. You might not win either, you probably won't. In fact, stall teams have a difficulty winning against teams of equal level to them. They only win against very under-leveled teams, which is why you need high levels to do stall and actually get streak out of it. But you can do some pretty silly things with stall. This is where we get our lobot used, which is a fun animal. I actually don't have one. Why am I even typing this command? Let's search for it. I know what its stats are, but let's search for it anyway. There we go, lobot. See if we can find someone doing an OO dex on it or something. Or we can just search for that. We could just search for it instead. Got to find the stats so I can explain better. Here we go. So, has a lot of health. This is definitely a tank. It also has a lot of defense. Lobot is very difficult to kill. However, there's no attack, no magic, and very little mana. This makes it not actually a great tank because it cannot use its tank abilities to its full extent. You're probably going to want to do something pretty silly with this. What you can do is give it like an orb with regen or something, so it just lives forever without even needing a shield. And then even if your attackers die, this just is impossible to kill. You could also do something like that with double gem AoE, which I mentioned. Your attackers die immediately, but the lobot is just impossible to kill. And on the off chance that your attackers don't die immediately, you get streak, which is cool. You could also do something where you do give the lobot a shield, and then if you do something with Arcane Scepter, I'm not going to have one of those, but it increases the amount of mana, takes mana from your opponents and gives it to your teammates. So if you had an animal with an Arcane Scepter that kept giving your lobot more mana, it can carry on using its shield. Again, you're giving up like an attacker or a support or something in order to do that, so your team is very slowly doing damage, but it is doing some. And as long as your opponents are underleveled enough, you will win. So yeah, that's kind of a weird one. Of course, you don't have to do stall with lobot. You can do it with other animals as well. Arcane Scepter generally is quite good for it. You want to go with something with a lot of health and not much mana, and then just Arcane Scepter. That's basically a good way to do stall. So for example, the same would work with T-Rex, which also has a lot of health and not much mana. But yeah, depends what you want to do. Stall, a bit of a meme, but it certainly works well if you've got a high level team. Of course, leveling up something like lobot to high level is going to be difficult at the start because you're going to be losing all your battles. Potentially you want to do this with huntbot instead, so you don't actually have to battle with it at low level. But anyway, that's all down to you. Next, we're finally talking about blitz. I've said it enough times, so that's happening. We've mentioned AoE blitz. You can do this with staff or with shield. This is just going to be 2 magic attackers or 1 magic and 1 physical. I wouldn't advise doing 2 physical, but you could if you wanted. Something like spider and fish together, very stereotypical, double gem AoE. But you can also do other things. If you got some fancy animals, you could do like a snake and a lizard, the hidden animals. That would be pretty fancy. Give them like a vampire staff and a dagger, I don't know. You can also do wacky things with orbs at this point if you want. That's kind of weird, but yep, could do that. There's a lot of ways to do blitz. The aim is basically just to have a lot of damage happening. One very strong strategy is to do something like axe blitz. That's pretty popular. Axe. Do you think I have an axe? Should we try and find an axe in my weapons? Hey, there we go. I've got one. So what axe does is it freezes your opponent so they can't attack. You freeze an enemy, they cannot attack next turn, so it does a reasonable amount of damage, but you can see this is not as much damage as a lot of other weapons, and it only applies to 1 opponent. So, debatably good. You're probably going to want to use axe and another attacking weapon, hence splits. And again, you can use that with Spirit Staff or with a shield. Either works. But yeah, the same goes for Scythe. Do you think I have a Scythe? I have a Scythe as well. Scythe used in similar situations to Axe. I think Axe is generally considered to be better, but Scythe has its place. You could even try and use both. Why not? So what this just does is decreases all healing for an animal. So if they're using healing staff, spirit staff, whatever, that's going to make it a bit easier to kill them. Of course, both of these being single target weapons, they're going to be attacking shields, but the upside of this is that the axe is going to stop the shield from triggering, and then the scythe is going to stop it from getting healing, so you probably kill the shield quite quickly, and you have a chance to take out the attacker behind it as well. So that's a thing. You'll find using teams like this that winning against meta is quite easy, but winning against random teams with silly animals actually becomes kind of difficult. This kind of team not actually that great for creating a streak. Not to say that you can't, you absolutely can. But in general, you use a team like this to break other people's streak rather than to get one yourself. You also get blitz teams using a banner. Once again, I'm going to see if I have a banner, and the answer is probably no. I do not have a banner. Banner, basically, you can go check the stats if you want, but it just increases the damage of your team. So if you're using especially something like a single target, which is doing a lot of damage, you can then go and use a banner with that to increase the damage even further. Make sure that if you were using 2 single targets, then supposedly they could be attacking different things. Of course, if there's a shield in play, that's not the case, but supposedly they could be attacking different things and not doing as much. But you have your banner that makes sure that all the damage is going onto one animal, so that's kind of cool. If you want to go crazy, you could go with banner and two attackers. That's a pretty heavy blitz going on right there, and they are all gonna die. But you could do that. You could do that if you wanted, and you are going to win against some teams. So yeah, that's fun. Also, there's some pretty wacky other things that you can do once you start looking into some more imaginative teams with more imaginative weapons. Even orbs at higher level are usable, actually. Orbs in general pretty garbage. You probably have an orb. If you might be looking at your weapons, it might be your only legendary weapon or something. You can put some pretty fun orbs if you think about the combinations with the passives. For example, I have this double kamikaze orb with pretty high quality. That's fun. When the animal dies, it's going to deal 150% of its max HP as magic damage to the attacker. You put that on something with a lot of HP, that's just going to insta-kill an animal, which is epic and cool. But of course, is this really worth having? Probably not. Is it going to be used? Probably not. But it's fun. So you can do some wacky things with orbs if you like. I have heard that double crit orbs are like the best way to deal damage ever or something, in theory. So sure, why not? Go get yourself a double crit orb. Of course, getting the right passives on an orb is very difficult. Getting them to a high quality is quite difficult. But on the other hand, high quality orbs are come by quite easily. The difficulty is getting high quality orbs with the right passives, and you also, like I said, need quite high level teams to use these kind of wacky strategies. You need to really understand what's going on in the game. In general, I would say just don't use orbs. It's complicated. But if you know what you're doing, well, I mean, if you know what you're doing, why are you watching the video? But putting that aside, use orbs because it's funny. That's basically it. It's funny. A lot of these teams are funny, and a lot of them are good. In general, you just need to pick one. You pick one, you look at your weapons, you know, I look at my weapons and I go, what's here that's fun? Healing staff with strength? Is that fun? I think not. Shall we use it anyway? Yeah! I don't know. Pick whatever you want. See what you've got. See what teams you can make. I'm sure you can come up with something interesting. Do you want to go for streak? Do you want to ruin people's days? Do you want to have a meme with orbs? Yeah, I don't know. It's up to you. Like I said at the start, there is no best team. So you can do absolutely anything, basically. Hopefully you kind of get the gist of what's going on. There's a lot of different teams at the point. You can make anyone that you want. Have some fun with it. Do not expect people to just hand you the best team ever as soon as you ask, because it's just not how it works. But yeah, experiment. That's really the point. Everyone that knows anything about teams basically was just like, hey, what if I do this? And then they did that, and then it probably didn't work. But maybe it did. Maybe. And then what happens is you get 100,000 streak on top of the leaderboards. Just because why not? So yeah. Anyway, I'm going to leave this one here. That is it. It's done. Bye.